this is written in a time of slavery and piracy, right? So what this article protects against is the capture of U.S. citizens or their property by any Moor or anyone else who might go to a Moorish port.
So, if anything, it sounds like U.S. citizens should get special privileges in Morocco, then, right?
Yeah, kind of. But this was in the late 17 and early 1800s. So, yeah, but unfortunately, the last 25, the last of these 25 articles, it spells out that the treaty would only last 50 years, and I'm pretty sure it's expired since then. So I don't think I don't think they've renewed that. But yeah, the interpretation of that treaty, I think it goes way beyond the historical context there. In reality, the Treaty of like peace and friendship, that was never about land ownership or personal sovereignty or the diplomatic status of Moors in the U.S. or vice versa. It was an agreement meant to protect American ships from piracy off the Barbary coast. That's what it was. And to groups like this, this treaty is basically their like ticket to independence from U.S. jurisdiction. And even more crazy, they argue that their Moorish ancestries predates the establishment of the U.S. and therefore U.S. laws don't apply to them because they were around first, which is honestly just silly because by that argument, basically every American except for Native Americans would get the same benefits, right? If you're Henry, you're Polish and whatever the hell it is that you are, right? Those countries, those nationalities, those ethnic heritages predate the U.S. So according to their logic, shouldn't you also be exempt from U.S. laws? Right? I don't think so. So,
I think their argument is that I think when we dive deeper into the subject, there's a lot of arguments. There's so many like different kind of arguments that they present.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are that or like pseudo histories that they present. Some of them is like, yeah, we were part of the Moorish Empire and then we came here through slavery. Some of them say things like we're actually native to the United States.
Oh, we'll get into that. Yeah.
But
don't let that cat out of the bag just yet.
But yeah, it's a wild claim.
You know what's crazy about this is that it's not just about like some guy stealing property. It can get really dicey with these groups. In 2021, a similar movement that's like in the same vein as the Moorish Sovereign Citizens, they actually were caught in a standoff with the police, like an armed standoff. Did you?
Yeah, I heard about that. I heard about that a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So the story there was that there were these 11 guys and they were heavily armed, and they were part of a group called the Rise of the Moors, who were traveling in like, just tactical gear. And they were on their way to apparently go to like the training camp or something like that. And then the state police found them on the side of the road and obviously questioned them. There's 11 guys heavily armed to the teeth. They refused to show ID. And they also refused to show any permits for the weapons that they had. And obviously didn't sit well with the police, right? These guys are carrying long arms openly, and they're not showing any ID or any proof that they legally have the right to, have these weapons out in the open, right? And again, their defense was rooted in the idea that as sovereign citizens, the U.S. laws don't apply to them, so they straight up refused to comply. But now we're talking about two groups of people who have guns, right? So this turned into a very tense standoff, right? It was 9 hours long that they were basically standing off against each other. And it got live streamed, actually, which is pretty interesting. And then eventually they end up surrendering. All the men get taken into custody. Nobody got shot, thankfully. But it could have been a bloody mess with all the weapons that were on premise at that time, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, that is a completely insane story, and I'm surprised it didn't get bigger coverage than it did because it's just so odd and out there.
I mean, media cycle is so fast these days that like this was a blip in 2021. Like this.
Yeah, fair point.
That didn't even matter. So it's not just like these physical confrontations that I think are concerning too, because And members of these types of movements often engage in what's called paper terrorism. And you kind of called it out in the beginning here, where they basically file things like fraudulent liens, legal documents, and lawsuits that are meant to basically overwhelm and intimidate their victims in the court system. And these tactics often they target law enforcement, government officials, and unfortunately, in the case of Shanetta, homeowners. And it creates this kind of like chaos that it puts them in a position to really solidify the belief in their own sovereignty. And for Shanetta, this nonsense turned her homeownership dream into, basically a nightmare. I mean, this guy physically took over her property. He sawed off the locks, moved in, and then held his ground on the property. Shanetta had to call in a SWAT team to forcibly remove him. Like, they had to call in a SWAT team, which is wild. And wild part about this is that he walked away without being charged. He was never charged. And he still maintains that, that land, and by extension, the house that's on that land, belongs to him through this Moorish ancestry. And this crazy scenario it's not a one-off. It's part of this like larger pattern of all these property disputes and legal challenges that have been launched by the Moorish Sovereign Citizens Movement across the U.S. and specifically has been increasing recently.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how many of these events have happened, because that's pretty wild. So where does this belief system come from? Like, how does this evolve into causing these sorts of problems?
Yeah, I mean, as crazy as this idea sounds now, these events are part of, I don't know, like a larger story. And it not only rewrites history, but it attempts to like reject modern governance, right? It's already a stretch to make the connection between the Moorish Empire and the Moorish Sovereign Citizens Movement, especially when you consider that the thing that they're using to connect this is, legal immunity. Also, Moors are not a group of citizens in that way. So yeah, the Moors aren't like a people. It was a broad term, as you said in the beginning,
Yeah, there was actually no such thing as the Moorish Empire. There was never a centralized Moorish state, quote unquote. That's why I said Moorish Empire, in quote. It wasn't like the Romans or the Ottoman empires. It was just essentially like a coalition of territories and states that were ruled by Muslim dynasties, and they were Berbers and Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
And that treaty that the U.S. signed was with the Kingdom of Morocco.
Mm-hmm.
They were called Moors and they used the language Moors just because that's how Europeans refer to them.
Mm-hmm.
But, within the Sultanate themselves, they didn't describe themselves as Moors. Like, oh, we have the honor of the Moors.
Right.
They just described themselves as Muslims.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, this whole story gets super crazy. I went down this rabbit hole, trying to figure out like, where does all this stuff come from? And I ended up in a dark corner of YouTube watching these alt history videos and conspiracy theories that, these groups are subscribing to or adjacent to. And what I learned kind of put their ideas into like a very strange perspective for me. So I came across this one video, and the video is called "Study Reveals Black Americans Aren't Descended from Black Slaves, but Hidden Native Original People." It's a mouthful of a title. What's crazy about this video is that it's been viewed over 274,000 times, right? And it's also, what's crazy about this video is that it's one of those like, AI robot voiceover videos. like
our podcast.
Yeah, just like Reginald, but don't invoke his name because he might jump in. So this video, it's been seen more than 250,000 times. The main claim is that Black Americans aren't really descended from African slaves, but they're instead native Black Americans who lived in America before Columbus arrived.
Well, there's actually a lot of Black nationalist movements that with these like really strange origin stories. Mm-hmm. So, Black Hebrew Israelites, who's kind of the poster child for it. So what they believe, and I actually have a book. Someone got this for me as like a joke. from Hebrews to Negroes,